Question 1. Operational review demonstrates a need to analyze student driving performance data to identify areas for curriculum improvement. Considering the privacy regulations in Ontario, Canada, which approach best balances operational needs with the protection of student personal information. Option A. Share aggregated student performance data with external driving education consultants for their analysis and recommendations, without obtaining explicit student consent for this data sharing. Option B. Anonymize all student performance data before analysis, without first assessing the specific privacy risks or legal requirements for such anonymization under Ontario law. Option C. Proceed with collecting and analyzing all available student performance data, assuming that operational improvement justifies the use of any collected information. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment, PIA, to identify potential privacy risks associated with collecting, using, and storing student performance data, and implement mitigation strategies to ensure compliance with Ontario's privacy laws before proceeding with the analysis. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment, PIA, to identify potential privacy risks associated with collecting, using, and storing student performance data, and implement mitigation strategies to ensure compliance with Ontario's privacy laws before proceeding with the analysis. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of data privacy and regulatory compliance. A driving instructor must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any review process respects the privacy rights of their students and adheres to the specific data protection laws of Ontario, Canada. The best professional practice involves a thorough impact assessment that prioritizes student privacy and compliance with Ontario's Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, and any relevant provincial privacy legislation. This approach would involve identifying what personal information is collected, how it is used, stored, and secured, and assessing the potential risks to student privacy. It would also include obtaining informed consent where necessary and implementing robust data security measures. This is correct because it proactively addresses privacy concerns and ensures adherence to legal obligations, fostering trust and demonstrating ethical conduct. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with data collection and analysis without first conducting a comprehensive privacy impact assessment. This failure to proactively identify and mitigate privacy risks could lead to breaches of PIPEDA, resulting in significant fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that all collected data is automatically permissible for operational review without considering its sensitivity or the need for anonymization or aggregation. This disregards the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are fundamental to privacy protection. Finally, an approach that involves sharing student performance data with third parties without explicit consent or a clear legal basis would be a severe violation of privacy laws and ethical standards, potentially leading to legal action and loss of student confidence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the legal and ethical landscape. This involves identifying all applicable privacy regulations, such as PIPEDA in Ontario, assessing the nature and sensitivity of the data involved, and evaluating the potential impact of data processing activities on individuals. A risk-based approach, where potential harms are identified and mitigated before data processing begins, is crucial. This includes consulting with privacy experts if necessary and embedding privacy considerations into all operational processes from the outset. Question 2. Investigation of a driver's inquiry at Provincial Licensing Office in Ontario reveals a request for specific details pertaining to another individual's driving history. The driver making the inquiry states they need this information for a personal matter. What is the most appropriate response? Adhering to Ontario's regulatory framework for driver information and privacy. Option A. Advise the driver to attempt to obtain the information through informal means or by contacting the other individual directly without specifying official procedures. Option B. Inform the driver that their own driving record can be accessed through official channels, but that information pertaining to another individual cannot be disclosed due to privacy regulations and the need for proper authorization. Option C. Provide the driver with the requested details about the other individual's driving history, assuming their stated personal reason is valid. Option D. Politely refuse to answer the question, without providing any explanation or guidance on how such information might be lawfully accessed. The correct answer is B. Inform the driver that their own driving record can be accessed through official channels, but that information pertaining to another individual cannot be disclosed due to privacy regulations and the need for proper authorization. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect a client's privacy and comply with data protection regulations. The driver's request, while seemingly straightforward, could inadvertently lead to a breach of privacy if not handled with extreme care. The challenge lies in providing assistance without overstepping boundaries or violating the principles of data confidentiality. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves acknowledging the request and explaining the limitations imposed by privacy laws and company policy. This approach directly addresses the driver's query by stating what can and cannot be done, thereby managing expectations and upholding regulatory compliance. Specifically, under the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, if applicable to the entity holding the data, individuals have a right to access their own information, but not to obtain information about others without proper authorization. Therefore, informing the driver that their personal driving record can be accessed through official channels, while declining to provide information about another individual, is the legally and ethically sound course of action. This upholds the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that personal information is not disclosed inappropriately. Incorrect approach is analysis. Providing the driver with the other individual's driving record, even if the driver claims it's for a legitimate reason, is a direct violation of privacy laws. This would constitute an unauthorized disclosure of personal information, potentially leading to legal penalties and reputational damage. It disregards the fundamental right to privacy and the strict rules governing access to personal data, suggesting the driver find a way to obtain the information without providing clear, lawful avenues could be interpreted as tacit encouragement of unauthorized access. While not a direct breach, it fails to guide the individual towards compliant methods and could inadvertently lead them to engage in improper information gathering. This approach lacks professional responsibility in guiding the inquirer. Ignoring the request entirely or simply stating, "I cannot help you," without further explanation is unhelpful and unprofessional. While it avoids a direct breach, it fails to educate the driver on proper procedures and the reasons for the refusal, potentially leading to frustration and a perception of unresponsiveness from the organization. It misses an opportunity to reinforce compliance and provide constructive guidance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes compliance, transparency, and helpfulness within legal boundaries. When faced with a request that may involve personal information, the first step is to identify the nature of the information requested and the requester's entitlement to it. If the request involves another individual's data, the professional must immediately recognize the privacy implications. The next step is to clearly communicate what information can and cannot be provided, citing relevant privacy principles or regulations. If the requester is entitled to their own information, they should be directed to the appropriate official channels for obtaining it. If the request is for information about another person, the professional must politely but firmly decline, explaining that such disclosure would violate privacy laws and that proper authorization or legal process is required. This approach ensures that professional duties are met while respecting individual rights and legal obligations. Question 3. Comparative studies suggest that driver licensing authorities in Ontario face varying levels of applicant documentation. In a situation where an applicant presents a foreign driver's license and claims it should exempt them from standard Ontario testing, what is the most appropriate course of action for an Ontario Ministry of Transportation licensing officer? Option A. Verify the foreign license's validity and assess its eligibility for equivalency testing or direct exchange according to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's established reciprocal agreements and regulations. Option B. Issue an Ontario driver's license immediately, assuming the foreign license indicates sufficient driving competency. Option C. Advise the applicant that their foreign license is irrelevant and require them to complete all standard Ontario driver's education and testing from scratch. Option D. Accept the foreign license as proof of competency and issue an Ontario driver's license without further verification or testing. The correct answer is A. Verify the foreign license's validity and assess its eligibility for equivalency testing or direct exchange according to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's established reciprocal agreements and regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and safety requirements mandated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. Misinterpreting or circumventing these requirements can lead to serious consequences, including licensing fraudulent individuals, compromising road safety, and facing regulatory penalties. Careful judgment is required to ensure all legal prerequisites are met before issuing a license. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations regarding driver licensing. This means verifying all documentation, ensuring the applicant has met all age, residency, and testing requirements, and confirming that no disqualifying factors are present. This approach is correct because it directly upholds the legal framework designed to ensure only qualified individuals operate vehicles on Ontario roads, thereby protecting public safety and maintaining the integrity of the licensing system. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting a foreign driver's license as automatically equivalent to an Ontario license without proper verification. This fails to comply with Ontario's specific licensing standards and may overlook essential knowledge or practical driving skills required for safe operation in Ontario. It bypasses the regulatory requirement for assessing an applicant's suitability under provincial law. Another incorrect approach is to expedite the licensing process based on a verbal assurance from the applicant that they have met all requirements, without independently verifying the submitted documents or test results. This disregards the procedural safeguards established by the Ministry of Transportation, which mandate thorough documentation review and confirmation of successful testing to prevent unqualified individuals from obtaining licenses. A further incorrect approach is to issue a license based on a perceived urgency or personal acquaintance with the applicant, even if all official documentation is not yet fully processed or verified. This prioritizes expediency or personal relationships over legal compliance and public safety, which is a direct violation of professional duty and regulatory mandates in Ontario. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding and applying the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and relevant Ministry of Transportation guidelines. 2. Implementing a strict verification protocol for all applicant documentation and test results. 3. Refusing to deviate from established procedures, regardless of external pressures or personal relationships. 4. Seeking clarification from supervisory or legal departments when faced with ambiguous situations. 5. Maintaining accurate and complete records of all licensing decisions. Question 4. The investigation demonstrates that a newly qualified driver in Ontario, Canada, who has held their G1 license for 10 months and completed an MTO-approved driver education course, is eager to attempt their G road test to gain full driving privileges. They argue that their extensive practice and successful completion of the course mean they are ready. What is the most appropriate course of action for their supervising driver? Adhering strictly to Ontario's graduated licensing system. Option A. Suggest the driver take the G2 road test immediately and then book the G road test shortly after, bypassing the mandatory waiting period for the G2 license. Option B. Advise the driver that they must wait until they have held their G2 license for at least 12 months, or 8 months if they completed an MTO-approved driver education course, and have passed their G2 road test before they are eligible to book and attempt the G road test. Option C. Allow the driver to book and attempt the G road test, as their successful completion of an MTO-approved driver education course and extensive practice suggests they have sufficient skills. Option D. Encourage the driver to practice advanced highway driving extensively, as this will prepare them for the G road test, even if they haven't officially passed their G2 test yet. The correct answer is B. Advise the driver that they must wait until they have held their G2 license for at least 12 months, or 8 months if they completed an MTO-approved driver education course and have passed their G2 road test before they are eligible to book and attempt the G road test. Explanation: the investigation demonstrates a scenario where a newly qualified driver in Ontario, Canada, is facing a common challenge: the temptation to bypass essential learning stages due to perceived pressure or impatience. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the supervising driver to balance their duty of care with the learner's enthusiasm, ensuring that safety and regulatory compliance are paramount, even when faced with persuasive arguments. The core of the challenge lies in upholding the Graduated Licensing System, GLS, in Ontario, which is designed to progressively build driving skills and experience in a safe environment. The best approach involves strictly adhering to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's MTO regulations for the Graduated Licensing System. This means ensuring the new driver has held their G1 license for the minimum required period, 12 months, or 8 months if they complete an MTO-approved driver education course, and has successfully passed their G2 road test before attempting the G road test. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legislative framework established by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and MTO guidelines, which are designed to reduce novice driver risk. The GLS is a tiered system, and attempting to accelerate it without meeting the specific requirements for each stage undermines the entire safety rationale behind it. Ethically, the supervising driver has a responsibility to ensure the learner driver is legally and safely prepared for each stage of licensing. An incorrect approach would be to allow the driver to attempt the G road test before meeting the minimum holding period for the G2 license. This fails to comply with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, specifically the provisions governing the Graduated Licensing System. It bypasses the mandatory G2 road test, which assesses a broader range of skills and experience necessary for unsupervised driving. Ethically, this is irresponsible as it exposes the public to an inadequately licensed driver and disregards the established safety protocols. Another incorrect approach would be to encourage the driver to practice advanced maneuvers, such as highway driving, extensively before they have officially passed their G2 road test and are legally permitted to do so without a fully licensed accompanying driver. While practice is important, doing so outside the legal framework of the GLS, particularly before passing the G2 test, is a violation of the Highway Traffic Act. This approach prioritizes perceived readiness over legal requirements and the structured progression of skills mandated by the MTO. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the relevant provincial licensing regulations. Professionals must prioritize legal compliance and safety above all else. This involves educating the learner about the GLS requirements, explaining the rationale behind each stage, and setting realistic expectations. When faced with pressure to expedite the process, professionals should firmly reiterate the legal and safety imperatives, offering alternative ways to support the learner's progress within the established framework, such as focusing on skill development for the upcoming G2 test rather than circumventing the process. Question 5. During a driving lesson in Cambridge, Ontario, a student suddenly experiences severe chest pain and difficulty breathing. As the supervising instructor, what is the most appropriate immediate action to take? Option A. Safely pull the vehicle over to the side of the road in a secure location and immediately call 911. Option B. Continue the driving lesson as planned, advising the student to try and manage their symptoms. Option C. Continue driving to the nearest hospital as quickly as possible, exceeding the speed limit if necessary. Option D. Attempt to administer basic first aid to the student while continuing to drive. The correct answer is A. Safely pull the vehicle over to the side of the road in a secure location and immediately call 911. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance adherence to traffic laws with the immediate needs of a passenger experiencing a medical emergency. The driver must make a rapid judgment call that prioritizes safety and legal compliance, while also considering the urgency of the situation. The challenge lies in determining the most appropriate course of action that minimizes risk to all parties involved and avoids unnecessary legal repercussions. The best approach involves immediately pulling over to a safe location off the roadway and calling emergency services. This action is correct because it directly addresses the passenger's medical emergency by summoning professional help without compromising the safety of the driver or other road users. It also aligns with the legal obligation to operate a vehicle safely and responsibly. By stopping and calling for assistance, the driver is taking proactive steps to manage the emergency within the bounds of traffic regulations. This demonstrates responsible decision-making, prioritizing both the passenger's well-being and public safety. An incorrect approach would be to continue driving at an excessive speed to reach the nearest hospital quickly. This is professionally unacceptable because it significantly increases the risk of an accident, endangering the driver, the passenger, and other road users. Exceeding speed limits, even with good intentions, violates traffic laws and could lead to severe consequences if an incident occurs. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the passenger's distress and continue the journey as planned. This is ethically and professionally unacceptable, as it demonstrates a failure to act responsibly in a situation requiring immediate attention and care for a passenger's well-being. It neglects the duty of care a driver has towards their passengers. A further incorrect approach would be to attempt to administer medical aid without proper training while continuing to drive. This is dangerous and unprofessional. Driving requires full attention, and attempting to provide medical assistance simultaneously diverts focus, increasing the risk of an accident. Furthermore, untrained individuals can inadvertently cause harm when attempting medical interventions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and the well-being of those in their care. In emergency situations, the first step should always be to secure the immediate environment, pulling over safely, and then summon appropriate professional assistance, emergency services. This structured approach ensures that immediate risks are mitigated before attempting to resolve the underlying problem. Question 6. Compliance review shows that an investment advisor in Ontario has a long-standing client who has recently requested to invest a significant portion of their portfolio into a highly speculative, illiquid, and unproven asset class that the advisor believes is entirely unsuitable given the client's stated risk tolerance and financial goals. The client is insistent and has explicitly stated they understand the risks and want to proceed. How should the advisor proceed? Option A. Refuse the client's request to invest in the speculative asset class without further discussion, citing it as a violation of the advisor's professional judgment. Option B. Immediately execute the client's instructions to invest in the speculative asset class, as the client has explicitly requested it and acknowledged the risks. Option C. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, but assure the client that the risks are manageable and not a significant concern. Option D. Engage in a detailed, documented discussion with the client to explain the specific risks and regulatory concerns associated with the proposed investment. Explore the client's underlying motivations and propose alternative, suitable strategies. The correct answer is D. Engage in a detailed, documented discussion with the client to explain the specific risks and regulatory concerns associated with the proposed investment, explore the client's underlying motivations, and propose alternative, suitable strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit, albeit potentially misguided, instructions and the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest and adhere to regulatory requirements. The advisor must navigate the delicate balance of respecting client autonomy while upholding their fiduciary responsibilities and the specific regulations governing financial advice in Ontario. The pressure to satisfy a long-standing client can also cloud judgment, making a structured, principle-based approach essential. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their request, explain the potential risks and regulatory implications of their proposed investment strategy, and clearly articulate why it deviates from prudent investment principles and regulatory guidelines. This approach prioritizes client education and informed consent. By explaining the risks and regulatory concerns, the advisor fulfills their duty of care and their obligation under Ontario's regulatory framework, which emphasizes suitability and client well-being. This proactive communication allows the client to make a more informed decision, potentially leading them to reconsider their request or to proceed with a clear understanding of the consequences. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately executing the client's instructions without further discussion or due diligence. This fails to uphold the advisor's duty of care and suitability obligations under Ontario securities law. It prioritizes client instruction over client welfare and regulatory compliance, potentially exposing both the client and the advisor to significant risk and regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach is to refuse the client's request outright without attempting to understand their motivations or providing a reasoned explanation. While the advisor may believe the request is unsuitable, a complete refusal without dialogue can damage the client relationship and may not address the underlying reasons for the client's interest in such an investment. It bypasses the opportunity for client education and collaborative problem-solving within regulatory boundaries. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the investment while downplaying the associated risks to the client. This is a direct violation of the duty to provide accurate and complete information. Misrepresenting the nature or extent of risks associated with an investment is unethical and breaches regulatory requirements for fair dealing and transparency, potentially leading to misinformed decisions by the client and severe regulatory repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives and risk tolerance. When a client's request appears to conflict with these or with regulatory requirements, the next step is to engage in open, honest, and documented communication. This involves educating the client about the risks, benefits, and regulatory implications of their proposed course of action, explaining why it may not be suitable, and exploring alternative strategies that align with their goals and regulatory expectations. The ultimate decision should be a collaborative one, based on informed consent and adherence to professional and regulatory standards. Question 7. Regulatory review indicates that drivers in Ontario, Canada, are obligated to obey traffic control signals. Considering the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which of the following approaches best demonstrates professional responsibility when a driver approaches a red traffic light and observes a desirable parking spot on the other side of the intersection, but the light is still red? Option A. Wait for the traffic light to turn green before proceeding, even if it means parking further away. Option B. Attempt to signal other drivers to allow passage through the red light. Option C. Proceed through the red light to reach the desirable parking spot. Option D. Ignore the red light and proceed if no other vehicles are immediately visible. The correct answer is A. Wait for the traffic light to turn green before proceeding, even if it means parking further away. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience with the strict legal requirements of road safety and traffic law in Ontario, Canada. The driver's desire to avoid a minor inconvenience, parking further away, conflicts with the obligation to obey traffic signals and ensure the safety of other road users. Careful judgment is required to prioritize legal compliance and public safety over personal expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to the traffic signal and proceeding only when it is safe and legal to do so. This means waiting for the green light, even if it means a slight delay or parking further away. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, specifically sections pertaining to traffic control signals and obedience to traffic control devices. Ethically, it upholds the driver's responsibility to operate a vehicle in a manner that does not endanger others and respects the established rules designed for collective safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding through a red light to reach a closer parking spot is a direct violation of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. This action creates a significant risk of collision with vehicles or pedestrians who have the right of way. It demonstrates a disregard for the law and the safety of others, which is ethically unacceptable for any licensed driver. Attempting to signal other drivers to let you proceed through the red light is also an unacceptable approach. This is not only illegal, but also undermines the established traffic control system and can lead to confusion and dangerous situations. It attempts to circumvent legal obligations through informal and potentially unsafe means. Ignoring the red light and proceeding without stopping, even if no other vehicles are immediately visible, is a serious offense. While the immediate risk might seem lower, it still violates the law and sets a dangerous precedent. The red light is a mandatory signal, and its purpose is to prevent accidents by ensuring orderly traffic flow. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field, including driving, must prioritize legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a situation where personal convenience conflicts with established rules and safety, The professional approach is to adhere to the rules. This involves understanding the relevant regulations, in this case, the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, assessing the risks associated with noncompliance, and making a decision that upholds safety and legality. A decision-making framework would involve 1. Identifying the legal requirement, obey the red light. 2. Assessing the risks of non-compliance, potential collision, fines, license suspension. 3. Considering the ethical implications, responsibility to public safety. 4. Choosing the action that aligns with legal and ethical standards, even if it is less convenient. Question 8. Consider a scenario where a driver in Ontario is experiencing a sudden and urgent personal family emergency while operating their vehicle on Highway 401. They are concerned about the well-being of a family member and feel a strong urge to immediately contact them. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action according to the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario? Option A. Pull over to a safe location off the highway as soon as it is practical to do so, and then address the personal emergency. Option B. Pull over to the shoulder of the highway and attempt to make a phone call using a handheld device. Option C. Continue driving at a reduced speed while attempting to use a hands-free device to communicate about the emergency. Option D. Continue driving normally, focusing solely on reaching their destination, and deal with the personal emergency upon arrival. The correct answer is A. Pull over to a safe location off the highway as soon as it is practical to do so, and then address the personal emergency. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal needs with the legal and safety obligations of operating a vehicle. The temptation to prioritize a personal emergency over adherence to traffic laws is significant, but doing so can have serious consequences for the driver and others on the road. Careful judgment is required to assess the urgency of the personal situation against the absolute necessity of safe driving practices and compliance with the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves pulling over to a safe location as soon as possible to address the personal emergency. This approach aligns with the fundamental principle of safe driving and legal compliance. The Highway Traffic Act of Ontario mandates that drivers operate their vehicles with due care and attention, and that they do not drive in a manner that is dangerous to the public. By pulling over, the driver removes the immediate risk to themselves and others, allowing them to attend to the personal matter without compromising road safety or violating traffic laws. This demonstrates responsible decision-making and adherence to the law. Incorrect approaches analysis. Continuing to drive while distracted by a personal emergency, even at a reduced speed, is a failure to exercise due care and attention. This increases the risk of an accident due to divided focus. It directly contravenes the Highway Traffic Act's requirement for attentive driving. Attempting to use a handheld device to communicate during the emergency while driving is a clear violation of Ontario's distracted driving laws. These laws are in place to prevent accidents caused by drivers not having their full attention on the road, ignoring the personal emergency, and continuing to drive as if nothing is happening is also professionally unsound. While it might seem like the safest option from a purely driving perspective, it fails to acknowledge the driver's responsibility to manage personal circumstances in a way that does not create a hazard. It also neglects the potential for the unresolved personal issue to lead to a lapse in concentration later. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field, including driving, must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing the situation and its potential risks. 2. Identifying all available options. 3. Evaluating each option against legal requirements and ethical considerations, in this case, road safety and the Highway Traffic Act. 4. Selecting the option that best mitigates risk and upholds obligations. In this scenario, the driver must recognize the dual demands of the personal emergency and the driving task, and then choose the safest and most legal method to address both. Question 9. Upon reviewing the progress of a student preparing for their G2 road test in Ontario, an instructor notes that the student is particularly anxious about parallel parking, but has a strong grasp of basic road maneuvers. Considering the official Cambridge driver's test syllabus and the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which approach best ensures the student is adequately prepared and compliant with provincial regulations? Option A. Focus the remaining lessons exclusively on parallel parking until the student feels confident, even if it means significantly reducing time spent on other essential road skills. Option B. Continue with the official syllabus, dedicating extra time to parallel parking practice within the scheduled lessons, while ensuring all other required competencies are also reinforced. Option C. Introduce advanced parking techniques and defensive driving maneuvers not explicitly detailed in the standard syllabus to impress the student with a broader skill set. Option D. Accelerate the pace of instruction, covering all remaining syllabus topics superficially to allow more time for the student to practice parallel parking independently before the test. The correct answer is B. Continue with the official syllabus, dedicating extra time to parallel parking practice within the scheduled lessons, while ensuring all other required competencies are also reinforced. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between a client's immediate desire and the regulatory requirements designed to protect both the client and the public. Driving instructor must exercise sound judgment to ensure that instruction aligns with the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario and its associated regulations, prioritizing safety and legal compliance over expediency or client pressure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to the official syllabus and the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. This approach ensures that all essential skills and knowledge are covered in the correct sequence, as mandated by provincial law. By following the established curriculum, the instructor guarantees that the student receives comprehensive training that prepares them for safe driving and meets the requirements for licensing. This aligns with the ethical obligation to provide competent instruction and the legal duty to comply with all provincial driving education standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves deviating from the official syllabus to focus solely on the maneuvers the student finds most difficult, even if it means skipping foundational elements. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the mandated curriculum, potentially leaving gaps in the student's understanding and skill set. It fails to meet the requirements of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which specifies the content and structure of driver education. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the student's perceived readiness for the test over thorough instruction, accelerating the learning process without ensuring mastery of all required competencies. This is ethically problematic as it compromises the safety of the student and other road users by potentially presenting a candidate for licensing who is not fully prepared. It also contravenes the spirit and letter of the Ontario driving regulations, which are designed to ensure a minimum standard of competence. A further incorrect approach is to introduce advanced or complex driving techniques not covered in the official syllabus before the student has mastered the basics. This can confuse the learner, hinder their progress in fundamental skills, and is a direct contravention of the prescribed learning pathway outlined in the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant legislation. In this case, the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario and its associated regulations. This framework requires prioritizing safety and legal compliance above all else. When faced with client pressure or perceived shortcuts, the professional must always refer back to the established syllabus and regulatory requirements. A structured approach involves 1. Confirming the mandated curriculum and legal obligations. 2. Assessing the student's progress against the syllabus, not just their perceived readiness. 3. Communicating clearly with the student about the learning process and the importance of adhering to the required steps. 4. Documenting all instruction provided, ensuring it aligns with the official standards. Question 10. When evaluating a candidate's understanding of vehicle running costs for a Cambridge driver's test in Ontario, Canada, a candidate provides the following information for their vehicle: annual insurance premium, $1 $200, annual licensing fee, $1 $120, average fuel price, $1 $50 per liter, vehicle fuel consumption, 8 liters per 100 kilometers, estimated maintenance cost, $0 $10 per kilometer, annual distance driven, 15,000 kilometers. What is the most accurate calculation of the candidate's total annual vehicle running cost? Option A, $1 $320 fixed costs plus 15,000 km/100 km asterisk 8L/100 km asterisk $1 $50/L, fuel cost plus 15,000 km asterisk $0 10/km, maintenance cost. Option B, $1 200 insurance plus 15,000 km/100 km asterisk 8L/100 km asterisk $1 50/L fuel cost. Option C, $1 200 insurance plus $120 licensing plus 15,000 km/100 km asterisk 8L/100 km asterisk $1 50/L fuel cost. Option D, 15,000 km/100 km asterisk 8L/100 km asterisk $1 50/L fuel cost. The correct answer is A, $1 320 fixed costs plus 15,000 km/100 km asterisk 8L/100 km asterisk $1 50/L fuel cost plus 15,000 km asterisk $0 10/km maintenance cost. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the accurate calculation of vehicle running costs for a driving test candidate in Ontario, Canada. The challenge lies in ensuring that the candidate's understanding of these costs is not only theoretical but also practically applied, reflecting real-world expenses and adhering to the principles of responsible vehicle ownership as implicitly assessed during a driving test. Miscalculations can indicate a lack of financial awareness, which is a component of safe and responsible driving. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves calculating the total annual cost by summing the fixed costs, insurance and licensing, and the variable costs, fuel and maintenance. Fuel cost is determined by multiplying the annual distance driven by the fuel consumption rate and the price per liter. Maintenance cost is calculated by multiplying the annual distance driven by the cost per kilometer for maintenance. This comprehensive calculation accurately reflects the total financial commitment of operating a vehicle, aligning with the practical knowledge expected of a licensed driver in Ontario. The Ontario Highway Traffic Act and associated regulations implicitly expect drivers to understand the financial implications of vehicle operation, contributing to overall road safety and responsible citizenship. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to only consider the fuel cost and ignore insurance, licensing, and maintenance. This fails to provide a complete picture of vehicle operating expenses, demonstrating a superficial understanding of the financial responsibilities of driving. Neglects significant fixed and variable costs that are crucial for budgeting and responsible vehicle ownership. Another incorrect approach is to simply add the annual insurance premium and the estimated annual fuel cost without factoring in licensing fees or maintenance. This is incomplete as it omits essential costs, leading to an underestimation of the total running expenses. A further incorrect approach is to calculate the cost based solely on the price per liter of fuel and the vehicle's fuel efficiency, without considering the distance driven or any other associated costs. This provides a cost per unit of fuel, not an annual running cost, and completely disregards other significant expenses. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such calculations by first identifying all relevant cost components. This involves understanding both fixed costs incurred regardless of usage, like insurance and licensing, and variable costs dependent on usage, like fuel and maintenance. The next step is to gather accurate data for each component, such as insurance premiums, licensing fees, average fuel prices in Ontario, the vehicle's fuel consumption rate, and estimated maintenance costs per kilometer. Finally, the professional should apply the appropriate formulas to sum these components, ensuring the calculation reflects a realistic annual expenditure. This systematic approach ensures accuracy and demonstrates a thorough understanding of the subject matter, aligning with professional standards and regulatory expectations. Question 11. The analysis reveals that a G1 licensed driver in Ontario, Canada, is practicing parallel parking maneuvers in a large, empty shopping mall parking lot on a Sunday afternoon. The driver's parent, who has a valid G2 license and has been driving for 2 years, is sitting in the back seat of the car. Which of the following best describes the compliance with Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and Ministry of Transportation guidelines for this practice session? Option A. The practice session is compliant as long as the driver is practicing basic maneuvers in a parking lot and not on a public road. Option B. The practice session is compliant because the supervising driver is present in the vehicle, regardless of their license class or seating position. Option C. The practice session is compliant because the supervising driver has a valid G2 license and has been driving for 2 years, which is sufficient experience for parking lot practice. Option D. The practice session is not compliant because the supervising driver must hold a valid G license and have at least 4 years of driving experience and must be seated in the front passenger seat. The correct answer is D. The practice session is not compliant because the supervising driver must hold a valid G license and have at least 4 years of driving experience and must be seated in the front passenger seat. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a learner driver in Ontario, Canada, is practicing driving maneuvers in a parking lot. The challenge lies in understanding the specific legal requirements and safety protocols applicable to learner drivers, even when not on public roads. Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and accompanying regulations govern the licensing and operation of vehicles, including those driven by individuals with a learner's permit. The key is to differentiate between the general rules of the road and the specific restrictions and supervision requirements for novice drivers. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the conditions of the G1 license, which mandates that a supervising driver with at least 4 years of driving experience and a valid G license must be present and in the front passenger seat. This supervision is crucial for immediate guidance and intervention, ensuring the safety of the learner and others, and for reinforcing proper driving habits from the outset. This aligns with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's emphasis on graduated licensing to foster safe driving skills progressively. An incorrect approach would be to assume that parking lot practice is exempt from supervision requirements. This fails to recognize that the Highway Traffic Act's provisions regarding learner permits are intended to apply whenever a vehicle is being operated by a G1 driver, regardless of location, to ensure a controlled learning environment. Another incorrect approach would be to have a supervising driver who does not meet the minimum 4 years of experience or holds a license other than a G license. This violates the specific criteria set by the Ministry of Transportation for effective supervision and compromises the safety and legality of the practice session. Finally, practicing without any supervision, even in a seemingly empty parking lot, is a direct contravention of the G1 license conditions and poses significant risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and compliance with all applicable regulations, even in seemingly low-risk situations. This involves consulting official sources for licensing requirements, understanding the intent behind specific rules, e.g., graduated licensing for safety, and erring on the side of caution when interpreting ambiguous situations. Question 12. Strategic planning requires a licensing agent in Ontario to consider various approaches when an applicant arrives for their G2 road test but is unsure about the required documentation. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation and promotes professional conduct? Option A. Inform the applicant that they are unprepared and send them away without providing any specific details about what documentation is missing. Option B. Politely explain the specific documents required for the G2 road test, as outlined by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, and advise the applicant to return once they have gathered all necessary items. Option C. Issue a temporary permit to the applicant, allowing them to take the test, and instruct them to submit the missing documentation at a later date. Option D. Allow the applicant to proceed with the road test, accepting their verbal assurance that they possess the correct documents and will provide them if requested. The correct answer is B. Politely explain the specific documents required for the G2 road test, as outlined by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, and advise the applicant to return once they have gathered all necessary items. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and safety requirements mandated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. The applicant's eagerness to obtain their license quickly, coupled with their incomplete understanding of the required documentation, creates a situation where a licensing agent must exercise careful judgment to uphold regulatory standards without being unduly obstructive. The core challenge lies in ensuring compliance with provincial law while providing clear, actionable guidance to the applicant. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and politely informing the applicant about the specific documentation required for their G2 road test, as stipulated by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the Ministry of Transportation's licensing procedures. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance by ensuring the applicant meets all prerequisites before proceeding. It is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirements for the road test, preventing the applicant from undertaking the test without the necessary proof of identity and eligibility, thereby avoiding a breach of provincial regulations and ensuring a fair and lawful process for all applicants. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing the applicant with a temporary permit without verifying their eligibility or the validity of their existing documentation would be a significant regulatory failure. This bypasses the established process for obtaining a G2 license and could lead to individuals driving without proper authorization, contravening the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and potentially endangering public safety. Allowing the applicant to proceed with the road test despite missing documentation, with the promise of submitting it later, is also a regulatory failure. This undermines the integrity of the licensing system and the Ministry of Transportation's control over who is legally permitted to drive. It creates an unacceptable risk of unqualified individuals obtaining licenses. Dismissing the applicant without explaining the specific documentation requirements would be unprofessional and unhelpful. While not a direct regulatory violation in itself, it fails to uphold the service aspect of the licensing agent's role and leaves the applicant uninformed, potentially leading to further delays and frustration, and indirectly hindering compliance with provincial requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals in licensing roles should adopt a systematic approach. First, clearly identify the applicant's stated objective, e.g., taking a G2 road test. Second, consult the relevant provincial regulations and internal procedures, e.g., Ontario Ministry of Transportation guidelines, to determine all mandatory prerequisites. Third, communicate these requirements clearly and politely to the applicant, explaining the purpose of each document. Fourth, verify all submitted documentation against the established criteria. If there are deficiencies, provide specific guidance on how to rectify them. This structured approach ensures both regulatory compliance and effective customer service. Question 13. Implementation of the Ontario driver's licensing process requires examiners to assess a candidate's ability to operate a vehicle safely and in accordance with provincial regulations. Considering a scenario where a driver has demonstrated competent driving for the majority of their road test, but exhibits a significant lapse in judgment or a violation of a critical traffic law in the final moments as they approach the testing center, how should the examiner proceed to ensure adherence to the standards set by the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario? Option A. The examiner should conclude the test immediately after the driver demonstrates competent driving for the majority of the test, assuming the final moments are less critical. Option B. The examiner should feel obligated to pass the driver if they have shown significant improvement and good performance throughout most of the test, even if a final infraction occurs. Option C. The examiner must continue to observe and evaluate the driver's performance until the vehicle is safely parked and the test is officially concluded, considering any infractions, regardless of their timing, as part of the overall assessment. Option D. The examiner may overlook minor infractions in the final moments if the driver has otherwise performed well to ensure a positive testing experience. The correct answer is C. The examiner must continue to observe and evaluate the driver's performance until the vehicle is safely parked and the test is officially concluded, considering any infractions, regardless of their timing, as part of the overall assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a driver's desire to complete their test efficiently and the examiner's paramount duty to ensure public safety and adherence to the stringent licensing requirements of Ontario. The examiner must balance the driver's immediate goal with the long-term implications of issuing a license to someone who may not yet possess the necessary skills or understanding of road rules. This requires a nuanced judgment call, prioritizing safety and regulatory compliance over expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the examiner meticulously observing the driver's performance throughout the entire duration of the test, including the final moments as they approach the testing center. This approach is correct because it aligns with the core objective of the Ontario Driver's Handbook and the Ministry of Transportation's licensing standards, which are designed to assess a driver's consistent ability to operate a vehicle safely and legally. The examiner's role is to evaluate the driver's overall competence, not just their performance during specific segments. Any lapse in judgment or adherence to rules, regardless of when it occurs, is a direct reflection of their driving capability and suitability for a license. This comprehensive evaluation ensures that only those who demonstrate a sustained commitment to safe driving practices are licensed, thereby upholding public safety on Ontario's roads. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the examiner prematurely concluding the test and focusing solely on the driver's positive performance during the majority of the test. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to acknowledge that a driver's ability to maintain safe driving practices must be consistent. A single, critical error at the end of the test, such as failing to check blind spots or running a stop sign, can negate any positive performance earlier and indicates a fundamental deficiency that could endanger others. This approach prioritizes the driver's perceived success over the safety mandate of the licensing process. Another incorrect approach is for the examiner to overlook a minor infraction because the driver has otherwise performed well. This is ethically and regulatorily flawed. The Ontario licensing system is built on a framework of specific rules and expectations, and even minor deviations can indicate a lack of attention or understanding that could escalate into more serious issues. Overlooking such infractions undermines the integrity of the testing process and the standards set by the Ministry of Transportation, potentially leading to the licensing of less competent drivers. A further incorrect approach is for the examiner to feel pressured by the driver's apparent eagerness to finish or their positive demeanor to overlook any potential issues. This is a failure of professional duty. The examiner's responsibility is to the public and the regulatory framework, not to the driver's personal comfort or desire to conclude the test. Allowing personal feelings or external pressures to influence the objective assessment of a driver's skills is a direct violation of ethical conduct and the principles of fair and rigorous testing. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective observation and adherence to established standards. This involves 1. Understanding the comprehensive nature of the assessment. The test is a holistic evaluation, not a series of isolated segments. 2. Maintaining strict impartiality. Personal feelings or external pressures must not influence judgment. 3. Applying the licensing criteria consistently. All rules and performance indicators, regardless of when they occur during the test, must be evaluated against the established standards. 4. Recognizing the ultimate responsibility. The examiner's primary duty is to public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. Question 14. To address the challenge of a client in Ontario, Canada, who is eager to book their G2 road test immediately, even though they have not yet completed the mandatory waiting period as stipulated by the graduated licensing system, what is the most appropriate professional course of action for a driving instructor? Option A. Explain the Ontario graduated licensing system, including the mandatory waiting periods and required tests for each stage, and schedule the test only when the client meets all legal requirements. Option B. Refuse to book the road test without providing any explanation or guidance on the legal requirements. Option C. Advise the client on potential ways to circumvent the mandatory waiting period to expedite their road test booking. Option D. Agree to book the G2 road test immediately, assuming the client can get away with it or that the system has oversights. The correct answer is A. Explain the Ontario graduated licensing system, including the mandatory waiting periods and required tests for each stage, and schedule the test only when the client meets all legal requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge stemming from a conflict between a client's immediate desire and the legal requirements for obtaining a driver's license in Ontario, Canada. The challenge lies in balancing client satisfaction with the absolute necessity of adhering to provincial regulations, specifically the Graduated Licensing System, GLS. Misjudging this balance could lead to serious legal and ethical repercussions for the driving instructor and potentially endanger public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly explaining the Ontario graduated licensing system to the client, including the mandatory waiting periods and required tests for each stage. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which governs driver licensing and mandates the GLS. By educating the client on the legal framework, the instructor upholds their professional responsibility to operate within the law and ensures the client understands the necessary steps to legally obtain a driver's license. This proactive communication prevents misunderstandings and sets realistic expectations, fostering a trusting professional relationship built on transparency and legal compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to book the road test immediately, despite the client not meeting the minimum waiting period. This is a direct violation of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario and the rules of the GLS. Demonstrates a failure to uphold professional integrity and a disregard for public safety by potentially allowing an unqualified driver onto the road. Another incorrect approach is to suggest the client attempt to bend the rules or find a loophole to bypass the waiting period. This is ethically reprehensible and illegal. It undermines the purpose of the GLS, which is designed to ensure new drivers gain sufficient experience before operating a vehicle independently. Such advice exposes both the instructor and the client to legal penalties. A third incorrect approach is to simply refuse to book the test without providing any explanation or alternative guidance. While not illegal, this approach lacks professionalism and client care. It fails to educate the client on the legal requirements and may lead to frustration or the client seeking less scrupulous instruction elsewhere. Professionalism dictates providing clear, legally sound advice and support. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding and adhering to all relevant provincial legislation, e.g., the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. 2. Prioritizing client education regarding legal requirements and safety protocols. 3. Maintaining transparency and setting realistic expectations. 4. Refusing any request that compromises legal or ethical standards, while offering constructive, lawful alternatives. Question 15. Examination of the data shows that during a practical driving test in Cambridge, Ontario, a candidate is instructed to perform a parallel park maneuver. The candidate verbally confirms understanding of the instruction, but then proceeds to position the vehicle in a manner that is clearly too far from the curb, indicating a misunderstanding of the required proximity as per Ontario's traffic regulations. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the examiner? Option A. The examiner should immediately stop the maneuver, explain the correct positioning relative to the curb as per the test requirements, and allow the candidate to restart the maneuver. Option B. The examiner should allow the candidate to complete the maneuver as attempted, noting the incorrect positioning as a minor error, and continue with the rest of the test. Option C. The examiner should immediately terminate the test and inform the candidate they have failed due to a fundamental misunderstanding of instructions. Option D. The examiner should provide detailed, step-by-step verbal guidance during the maneuver to ensure the candidate achieves the correct positioning. The correct answer is A. The examiner should immediately stop the maneuver, explain the correct positioning relative to the curb as per the test requirements, and allow the candidate to restart the maneuver. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between a client's stated wishes and the practical implications of those wishes within the context of Ontario's traffic laws and the Cambridge driver's test requirements. The examiner must balance the need to assess the candidate's ability to follow instructions with the paramount responsibility of ensuring road safety and adherence to legal standards. Misinterpreting or misapplying the rules could lead to an unsafe driving situation or an unfair assessment of the candidate. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the examiner clearly and precisely communicating the instructions for the maneuver, ensuring the candidate understands the specific requirements of the test, and then observing the candidate's execution. If the candidate's interpretation or execution deviates from the correct procedure as defined by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the standards of the Cambridge driver's test, the examiner must intervene to correct the misunderstanding or failure to comply. This approach ensures that the candidate is assessed on their ability to perform the maneuver safely and legally, as required by the test. The examiner's role is to evaluate competence against established criteria, not to accommodate potentially unsafe or non-compliant actions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the examiner allowing the candidate to proceed with a maneuver that is clearly unsafe or non-compliant with traffic laws, simply because the candidate stated they understood the instruction. This fails to uphold the examiner's duty of care and the integrity of the testing process. It ignores the practical application of the instruction and the potential for immediate danger or a violation of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. Another incorrect approach is for the examiner to provide overly detailed or leading instructions that essentially guide the candidate through the maneuver. This compromises the assessment by not allowing the candidate to demonstrate independent judgment and skill. The test is designed to evaluate the candidate's existing abilities, not to teach them during the examination. A further incorrect approach would be for the examiner to dismiss the candidate's stated understanding and immediately fail them without attempting to clarify the instruction or observe their attempt. While safety is paramount, a degree of communication and opportunity to demonstrate competence is expected within the testing framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and adherence to regulatory standards above all else. This involves clear communication, objective observation, and fair assessment against established criteria. When faced with ambiguity or potential noncompliance, the professional should first seek to clarify instructions and then observe the candidate's actions. Intervention should be timely and focused on correcting unsafe practices or clear breaches of regulations, ensuring the integrity of the assessment process. Question 16. Research into the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario suggests that drivers must interpret various traffic signals correctly. If a driver approaches an intersection in Ontario and observes a flashing red traffic light, what is the legally mandated and safest course of action? Option A. Stop briefly, then proceed immediately, assuming other drivers will yield. Option B. Proceed through the intersection cautiously without stopping, as long as no immediate traffic is visible. Option C. Treat it as a yield sign, slowing down and proceeding if the way is clear. Option D. Come to a complete stop, yield to all other traffic and pedestrians, and then proceed when it is safe. Correct answer is D. Come to a complete stop, yield to all other traffic and pedestrians, and then proceed when it is safe. Explanation. Research into the application of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario reveals that understanding the nuances of traffic signal interpretation is crucial for safe driving. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to make an immediate decision under pressure, where a misinterpretation could lead to a collision or a traffic violation. The driver must not only recall the rules, but also apply them to a dynamic, real-time situation. The best approach involves a thorough understanding of Ontario's traffic signal regulations, specifically regarding the meaning of a flashing red light. A flashing red light in Ontario is treated as a stop sign. This means the driver must come to a complete stop before the marked stop line, or, if none, before entering the intersection. After stopping, the driver must yield the right-of-way to any pedestrians or other traffic already in the intersection or approaching so closely as to constitute an immediate hazard. The driver may then proceed when it is safe to do so. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the explicit provisions of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario concerning flashing red signals, ensuring the safety of all road users and compliance with the law. An incorrect approach would be to treat a flashing red light as a yield sign. This fails to acknowledge the requirement for a complete stop mandated by the Act for flashing red signals, thereby increasing the risk of collision by not adequately assessing oncoming traffic after stopping. Another incorrect approach is to proceed through the intersection without stopping, assuming it is safe. This is a direct violation of the Highway Traffic Act and demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the signal's meaning, creating a significant hazard. Finally, stopping only briefly without ensuring the intersection is clear before proceeding is also incorrect. While it involves a stop, it neglects the critical obligation to yield the right-of-way to other traffic and pedestrians, which is a core component of safely navigating an intersection controlled by a flashing red light. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to traffic laws and the safety of others. This involves 1. Recognizing the traffic control device and recalling its specific meaning under Ontario law. 2. Executing the required action, e.g., complete stop. 3. Assessing the situation for potential hazards, e.g., other vehicles, pedestrians. 4. Proceeding only when it is safe and legally permissible. Question 17. When verifying a client's driving privileges in Ontario, Canada, which approach would be most appropriate to ensure compliance with provincial regulations and ethical standards? Option A. Formally request the driver's license status directly from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation through their official inquiry channels. Option B. Infer the validity of the driver's license based on the client's general demeanor and past interactions. Option C. Ask a personal acquaintance who works within the Ontario Ministry of Transportation for a quick status check. Option D. Accept the client's verbal assurance that their driver's license is valid and in good standing. The correct answer is A. Formally request the driver's license status directly from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation through their official inquiry channels. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect client confidentiality and adhere to the specific rules of the road in Ontario, Canada. A driver's license is a critical document, and its status directly impacts an individual's ability to operate a vehicle legally. The Ministry of Transportation, MTO, in Ontario has strict regulations regarding the disclosure of driver information. The best approach involves a direct and compliant method of obtaining the necessary information. This means formally requesting the driver's license status through the official channels established by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. This approach is correct because it respects the legal framework governing driver information in Ontario, ensuring that any access to such data is authorized and documented. It upholds the principles of privacy and due process, preventing unauthorized access or misuse of sensitive personal information. Adhering to official procedures also ensures the accuracy and reliability of the information obtained, which is crucial for making informed decisions. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to access the driver's license status through informal or unauthorized means. For instance, directly asking a friend who works at the MTO for the information bypasses the established protocols. This is ethically problematic as it exploits a personal connection for professional gain and potentially violates the friend's professional conduct rules and the MTO's privacy policies. It also carries a significant risk of obtaining inaccurate or outdated information, leading to incorrect decisions. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the driver's license is valid based on their word alone without verification. This is professionally negligent, as it fails to exercise due diligence and could lead to serious consequences if the driver is, in fact, unlicensed or their license is suspended. Relying on hearsay or assumptions is not a sound basis for professional decision-making, especially when legal compliance and public safety are at stake. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and due diligence. This involves identifying the specific information required, understanding the relevant legal and regulatory requirements for obtaining that information in the given jurisdiction, in this case, Ontario, and then utilizing only authorized and documented procedures. If unsure about the correct procedure, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel is essential. The principle of innocent until proven guilty does not extend to assuming legal compliance. Verification is paramount. Question 18. Governance review demonstrates a need to evaluate how a newly licensed driver in Cambridgeshire applies the principles of hazard perception and safe following distances when encountering a queue of traffic on a rural road. Option A. The driver attempts to overtake the queue of traffic on a blind bend, believing that the delay will be too significant to tolerate. Option B. The driver follows the vehicle directly in front very closely, assuming that the driver ahead is aware of all potential hazards and will react appropriately to any dangers. Option C. The driver maintains a safe following distance from the vehicle ahead, continuously scans for potential hazards such as emerging farm vehicles or cyclists, and prepares to brake smoothly if necessary, even if it means being overtaken. Option D. The driver accelerates to match the speed of the surrounding traffic, even if it means reducing the following distance to less than the recommended 2-second rule, to avoid being perceived as a slow driver. The correct answer is C. The driver maintains a safe following distance from the vehicle ahead, continuously scans for potential hazards such as emerging farm vehicles or cyclists, and prepares to brake smoothly if necessary, even if it means being overtaken. Explanation. Governance review demonstrates a need to assess the practical application of road safety principles learned during the Cambridge driver's test syllabus. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to translate theoretical knowledge into safe, real-world driving behavior, especially when faced with unexpected situations or pressure from other road users. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety over expediency or peer influence. The best professional practice involves a proactive and defensive driving approach. This means anticipating potential hazards, maintaining adequate space from other vehicles, and adhering strictly to all traffic laws and signals, even if it means being perceived as overly cautious by others. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the core objectives of the Cambridge Driver's Test, which are to ensure drivers can operate a vehicle safely and responsibly, minimizing risk to themselves and others. The syllabus emphasizes understanding road signs, speed limits, and the importance of observation and planning, all of which contribute to a defensive driving strategy. Ethically, this approach upholds the duty of care owed to all road users. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed and efficiency over safety, such as accelerating rapidly to match the speed of surrounding traffic, or overtaking aggressively in situations where visibility is limited. This fails to adhere to the principles of safe driving and the specific instructions within the Cambridge syllabus regarding appropriate speed and safe overtaking. Another incorrect approach is to be easily influenced by the behavior of other drivers, such as following too closely or engaging in risky maneuvers because others are doing so. This demonstrates a lack of independent judgment and a failure to apply learned safety principles, directly contravening the syllabus's emphasis on individual responsibility and hazard perception. Finally, ignoring or misinterpreting road signs or signals to save time is a critical failure, as the syllabus places significant importance on understanding and obeying all traffic control devices for the orderly and safe flow of traffic. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and adherence to regulations above all else. This involves a continuous assessment of the driving environment, anticipating the actions of others, and making decisions that minimize risk, even if those decisions are not the quickest or most popular. The foundation of this framework is the knowledge and understanding gained from the Cambridge Driver's Test syllabus, applied with a strong sense of personal responsibility. Question 19. Strategic planning requires a driving instructor in Ontario to consider various client requests. If a client, who has been receiving instruction for their G2 license, expresses a strong desire to drive independently on public roads immediately after their last lesson, even though they have not yet passed their official G2 road test, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the instructor? Option A. Clearly explain to the client that they must successfully pass the G2 road test as mandated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation before driving independently on public roads. Option B. Advise the client to obtain a learner's permit and then drive unsupervised, suggesting this is a way to gain experience. Option C. Refuse to discuss the matter further with the client, offering no explanation for the refusal. Option D. Allow the client to drive independently, reasoning that they have received sufficient instruction and appear competent. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain to the client that they must successfully pass the G2 road test as mandated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation before driving independently on public roads. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire and the regulatory requirements designed to protect both the client and the public interest. The driving instructor must exercise sound judgment to uphold professional standards and legal obligations while maintaining a positive client relationship. The challenge lies in navigating the client's impatience and potential frustration without compromising safety or compliance with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's MTO licensing regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly explaining to the client that they must successfully complete the G2 road test before being permitted to drive independently on public roads in Ontario. This approach directly aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and MTO licensing procedures. The MTO mandates that all new drivers must pass specific road tests to progress through the licensing stages. By adhering to this, the instructor upholds their ethical duty to ensure road safety and legal compliance, preventing the client from operating a vehicle without the necessary certification, which would be a serious contravention of provincial law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to agree to let the client drive without passing the G2 test, perhaps with the justification that they seem ready or just need a little more practice. This is a direct violation of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. It bypasses the mandatory licensing process, which is in place to assess a driver's competency and ensure they meet minimum safety standards. This action would expose the instructor to legal penalties and put the public at risk. Another incorrect approach is to suggest the client obtain a learner's permit and then drive without supervision, claiming it's a loophole. This is also a failure to comply with Ontario's graduated licensing system. A learner's permit has specific restrictions, including the requirement for supervision by a fully licensed driver. Allowing unsupervised driving under a learner's permit is illegal and unsafe. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the client's request and simply refuse to discuss it further without explanation. While the instructor is correct in not allowing the illegal activity, a complete lack of communication can damage the professional relationship and fail to educate the client on the importance of the licensing process. This approach, while not directly illegal, is professionally deficient, as it misses an opportunity to reinforce safe and legal driving practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. When faced with a client request that conflicts with regulations, the first step is to identify the relevant laws and guidelines, in this case, the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and MTO licensing requirements. Next, clearly and politely communicate the legal and safety reasons behind the refusal, educating the client on the necessity of the process. Finally, offer alternative compliance solutions, such as scheduling further lessons to prepare for the official test. Question 20. Strategic planning requires a driver in Ontario to consider various factors before commencing a delivery. A driver has a scheduled delivery with a strict deadline. They suspect a minor issue with their vehicle's braking system, but have not performed a full pre-trip inspection. They need to estimate the fuel required for a 350 km trip, knowing their truck averages 4.5 km per liter, and the current fuel price is $1.50 per liter. If they proceed without a full inspection, and the suspected brake issue is more significant than anticipated, it could lead to a delay of at least 2 hours due to potential mechanical failure or accident. If they perform the full inspection and a minor repair is needed, it will take approximately 45 minutes. Calculate the minimum additional cost incurred if the driver opts for the full inspection and potential minor repair, compared to proceeding immediately with the suspected issue and risking a significant delay. Option A. The minimum additional cost incurred by performing the full inspection and potential minor repair is $135.00. Option B. The minimum additional cost incurred by performing the full inspection and potential minor repair is $112.50. Option C. The minimum additional cost incurred by performing the full inspection and potential minor repair is $90.00. Option D. The minimum additional cost incurred by performing the full inspection and potential minor repair is $100.00. The correct answer is B. The minimum additional cost incurred by performing the full inspection and potential minor repair is $112.50. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate financial pressures with long-term safety and regulatory compliance. The temptation to cut corners to meet a deadline, especially when facing potential financial penalties, is significant. However, prioritizing speed over proper vehicle maintenance can lead to dangerous situations, contravening the fundamental duty of care owed to oneself and other road users. Careful judgment is required to assess the risks associated with a potentially compromised vehicle and to make a decision that upholds safety standards and legal obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough pre-trip inspection, including a check of essential safety components like brakes, tires, and lights, and then calculating the estimated fuel consumption and time required for the journey based on the vehicle's known efficiency and the planned route. If the calculation indicates that the journey cannot be completed safely and within the required time frame without exceeding the legal driving hours or compromising vehicle safety due to the suspected issue, the driver must communicate this to their dispatcher and request an alternative solution, such as a vehicle swap or a revised schedule. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the principles of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which mandates that drivers ensure their vehicle is in a safe operating condition before and during operation. It also aligns with the ethical responsibility to prioritize safety above all else, preventing potential accidents and legal repercussions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the journey immediately after a cursory visual check, assuming the vehicle is safe enough and that the suspected brake issue is minor. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a comprehensive pre-trip inspection, as stipulated by the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. It also demonstrates a disregard for the potential severity of brake malfunctions, which could lead to a serious accident and significant legal liability. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to nurse the vehicle to the destination by driving at a significantly reduced speed and avoiding heavy braking, while still proceeding without a proper inspection or repair. While this might seem like a compromise, it still involves operating a vehicle with a known or suspected safety defect. This is contrary to the Highway Traffic Act's emphasis on maintaining vehicles in a safe condition and could still result in an accident, especially in unexpected situations requiring sudden braking. A third incorrect approach is to contact the dispatcher and request permission to bypass the pre-trip inspection to save time, arguing that the vehicle feels fine. This is ethically unsound, as it attempts to circumvent established safety protocols for personal or perceived organizational convenience. It places the dispatcher in a difficult position and ultimately fails to absolve the driver of their personal responsibility for ensuring vehicle safety under the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding and adhering to all relevant legislation, e.g., Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. 2. Conducting all mandatory checks and inspections thoroughly. 3. Using mathematical calculations to assess feasibility and risk, e.g., fuel consumption time estimates. 4. Communicating any identified issues or potential noncompliance proactively and professionally to supervisors. 5. Never compromising safety for the sake of speed or convenience.